Welcome, everybody. We are so pleased that you can join us today. My name is David Uy. I'm Executive Director of the Chinese American Museum in Washington, D.C., the only museum in our nation's capital dedicated to the Chinese American story. Today, we are honored to have two amazing guests. Chris Liu is an attorney and political advisor and former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Labor. He's a former assistant to the president during the Obama administration, and now is part of the transition team for the upcoming administration. So we are very appreciative that you've taken time right now to speak with us. And Joie Chen is an Emmy Award-winning television journalist. She was previously an anchor and correspondent for CNN, CBS News, and Al Jazeera America. And she's currently a contributor to the syndicated program Matter of Fact. She recently joined the leadership of the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, a nonprofit in journalism education. So, well, suffice it to say, there is a lot going on in Washington these days, but as we've planned it, today's conversation is a break from the the chaos that is around us. Chris and Joie are going to talk mostly about the influences and paths that led them to their amazing careers. So just a quick housekeeping note, if you have any questions or comments, you can use the chat or Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll do our best to get your questions answered. So with that, I hand it over to Chris Liu and Joie Chen. Welcome.
Oh, thanks, David. That's really great. Chris, it's great to see you again on the other side of a screen. This is just going on too long. You know, I'm thinking that I'm sitting here in my living room, which is really right down the road from where you grew up. Can you tell me a little bit about this part of suburban DC in the time that you grew up here, particularly for the community?
Yeah, Joey, first of all, thank you for joining me for this. I mean, we've only talked in email a couple of times, but I think we're going to be fast friends. Look, I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, so about half hour outside of DC. My parents were both immigrants from China through Taiwan. They came here for college, and you know, it was a pretty typical suburban, you know, middle class upbringing. You know,
just was it very Chinese though? I mean, Rockville Pike today is, well, it's where we eat pretty much.
Yeah, let me tell you, the Chinese food is much better in Maryland than it is in Virginia, where I live right now. You know what? There were a lot of Chinese Americans in Montgomery County, and it's for a couple of reasons. One is, you know, you both had NIH that's in Bethesda. You had the National Bureau of Standards, which is now NIST, which was a little bit further up, 270. You had really good public schools. And so it became a natural place for Chinese Americans. And it's one of the reasons why there's so much great food still in that area. And that area has just kind of boomed even more since the time I was there. All right, so I'm going to turn this back to you, Joey. This is a conversation. So tell me about your upbringing, where your parents were from, and those influences early on in your life.
Well, as I like to say to you, Chris, I am your elder.
By a couple of years, not that much.
By more than a couple years, hopefully not too many. But I grew up outside of Chicago in an area very similar, actually, to the relationship between DC and this part of Maryland. I live in Bethesda now, but I grew up outside of Chicago in Evanston, which is the first suburb north, and grew up what my father. Both my parents have passed, but my father was Chinese and my mother was Japanese, and that put us in kind of an unusual situation with the community, particularly in their generation. Maybe a younger generation might not understand this, but my parents both remembered the difficulties between their communities. And so we were kind of outside of either community, and I was raised in a very integrated, in a black-white sense, community, but there were just a handful of us Asian American kids sometimes less than a handful. Sometimes there was me, but so not a community where I had a lot of contact with Asian Americans. And I didn't even think, Chris, when I was growing up, I didn't even know that I was Asian, right? I'm like one of those people who grew up and found out they were Asian. That's just honest truth. I thought I was possibly blonde, and if I just used Sun-In or lemon juice on my hair, I would get to be a blonde girl, but that didn't happen.
All right, so we had talked offline about our lack of knowledge of Chinese. How much Chinese did you have growing up, and how did you pick it up, and how much can you do now?
My Chinese is so bad that when I went to China with my father as an adult, I was married, my husband and I went with my father, and we got off the plane, and right then he turned to me and he said, "Don't talk to anybody." And I said, "What?" "Don't talk to anybody." And I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Your Chinese is so bad. Don't talk to anybody. They're just going to find out how bad. I'm just going to tell them that you can't speak Chinese." I'm like, "You're getting off the plane. You're telling me this now?" And then he gave me calling cards, and he said, "Definitely don't write your name down because you write like a 5-year-old and people will find out." So the whole trip, I had to stand there and listen to him tell people, "Oh, no, my daughter doesn't speak any Chinese." I'm like, I am not a potted plant. I can hear you. I know what you're saying. But Chinese school should have helped that. It didn't work out super well for me. I don't know. How did it work for you?
No, not well. I mean, look, it was, I will admit it was not one of the most fun things I had to do. It was, Sunday afternoon between 2 and 4. And when
you only had to go for 2 hours, I had to go for like 5.
Yeah. Oh, geez. It probably would have stuck more if I had gone for 5 hours. So it's in the middle of a Sunday afternoon. And so if you're a football fan, it's really not the ideal situation. I took Chinese school all the way through. I even took Chinese in college too. And probably at some point in college, it switched from being a really easy A to really being a very, very hard class. And then I kind of dropped it after that. My Chinese skills are minimal right now. I have gone to China a couple of times, and each time I've gone online and hired a tutor or done kind of a quick Berlitz to try to beef up. The very first time or second time I went to China in 2010, I went on a delegation with former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and we were visiting a school to do a tree planting, and they assigned each of the people in the U.S. delegation to like I'll say it's probably a third grader, a Chinese third grader, and she was practicing her English, and I was practicing my Chinese, and literally within 5 minutes, it became very clear her English was a lot better than my Chinese, so we just switched to English. So that gives you a sense of how astonishingly bad my Chinese is.
But truth, I mean, did your folks speak Chinese at home?
Yeah,
because my parents were different. They didn't.
Right. My mom and dad spoke Chinese to me at home, and I responded in English. So even now, somebody speaking conversational to me at a relatively, not a fast clip, like kind of a normal pace, I can pick up most of it along the way. So I'm curious, we spent a lot of time talking offline about our paths to the careers we, made our calling in, and how there weren't a lot of role models along the way. Tell me about how you got interested in journalism and how you were able to overcome the fact that there, frankly, weren't and still aren't a lot of people like you and me on TV.
I think when I think about it now, I think I was just naive. I wasn't really very conscious that that I was a peculiarity. I just thought I was doing a thing. And as I said, I grew up thinking that I was white. I didn't know. So I didn't think about it a great deal. I think when I started in television, there were really a handful. And I started in South Carolina, which just made the whole thing more alien has landed here. So that was very different to me. But I felt in the course of my career, and I hope and believe that it is somewhat better today, but there were never a lot of seats on the boat, right? So, you could only have one with egg roll. And, so there was like one scene, I remember there was a period in network television where all three of the morning anchors, news anchors, were Asian American. The reason being, and women, and the reason being because they were viewed as the smart sister on the program, right? And Curry, Juju was doing it then, I think, and Joie Chen. So they were supposed to be these smart Asian women. They could read the news, but sitting on the couch, the warm, happy family stuff, that was going to be somebody who looked more like the family. So I do think that there has long been just a few seats on the boat, and I think that limits certain opportunities.
Has that changed?
I like to think it's changed, but not necessarily. I mean, for example, none of those women even anchor those little 5-minute news segments anymore. So, but on the other hand, we see somebody like Elaine Quijano, had a major role in not this, but previous debates. And so, I think sometimes it happens, but there are a limited number of seats. Look at CNN today. Seeing Asian faces, not so much. MSNBC, again, considered to be a progressive environment, but not. You see a lot, actually, of Asian American women on the business channels.
Yeah.
And I think, once again, it's sort of this, they look smart. The audience will perceive them to be smart. So the serious business stuff, yeah, they could do that. I think that there's a little bit of pigeonholing that goes with that. But like in your world too, I mean, I gotta ask, because I know you're part of the Biden transition team right now, people have asked the question, why aren't we seeing Asian American faces in the president's cabinet when he had said that he really wanted to make it look more like America?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair criticism. I mean, look, let's first state that he has appointed two people who are in his cabinet. One is the director of Office of Management and Budget, and one is the U.S. Trade Representative. But what is also fair to say is that of the 15 statutory departments, the people who are called Secretary of what, there is not an Asian American. That will be an Asian American secretary. That's the first time that has not been the case since the Clinton administration, before the Clinton administration. And so it's significant. And, we have just finished a presidential election in which Asian American voters were the deciding margin in a number of states, in particular in a place like Georgia, where they may have been influential in helping to flip 2 Senate seats. And so it is an issue. And again, just to go back to, your world of journalism, post government tenure in the Obama administration, I've spent a good chunk of the last 4 years doing political commentary on TV. It is the rare political panel I am on when there's another Asian American with me, and something is missing. I mean, when our perspectives, and again, on most of the issues that our country faces that we discuss on TV, there's not an Asian American perspective versus a non-Asian American perspective. But I do think it's helpful for that next generation to see people like you and me on TV. And, the only person who, and again, you can correct me, the only Asian face that I see regularly on those two networks, CNN and MSNBC, is Richard Louie. And Richard doesn't even have his own regular show. And I think, and I think for those of us that look up to Richard, he goes out of his way to try to book diverse panels with Asian Americans. He really has been an incredible mentor to many of us, but there aren't enough people like him. And when you look at who's getting the new shows, the good time slots on TV, it's not people that look like you and me.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And again, all props to Richard for really taking that bull by the horns and really being upfront and trying to not only bring our faces into the conversation, but I think the stories. And I think that's really, really important. You have to have an advocate. We talk about diversity in newsrooms and why that's important. And that's a perfect example. You don't know those stories if you don't know those communities. You don't know those communities until you have people who come from those communities, whatever they are. You know, you need to have those voices be part of the program, or you're not going to. And it, from a purely mercenary business standpoint, I think that the traditional media, legacy media, loses out some on audience, because quite frankly, the Asian American audience is a good, wealthy, educated audience. And so it's sort of unfortunate that they don't get that message, that this is an audience you could cultivate, but you got to cultivate them with some recognition of the folks.
Yeah, I mean, it's short-sighted when you just consider the buying power of our community.
Right.
You are missing out on a lot of people. But you know, I often say, and again, I'll hold our own community out, as some of the fault falls on us. I mean, you know, if this were in a comparable racial community and they had this lack of representation, they'd be leading boycotts of advertisers to try to get this representation. We haven't done that.
Or running more candidates, Chris, which
Yeah.
brings me to sort of my thing that I keep asking you, like, how come I don't have a Chris Liu banner in my front yard?
You should have a Chris Liu banner in your front yard. No, I mean, look, it's easy to say. Look, I never say never in terms of running for office, and so I'm not here to announce I'm doing anything now. But I will say,
you better do it with us if you're ever going to announce anything.
I will say this: look, it takes a special kind of person to put their name on a ballot, to go ask people for money, to ask people for support, to subject their family to that kind of public scrutiny. It's not to say I wouldn't do that, but I think some people are more in tune to that. You know, look, we spent a long time offline talking about somebody like Andrew Yang. And Andrew Yang really, in many ways, has, I think, exceeded everyone's expectations when he ran for office. And what was remarkable about his run is that his support wasn't just Asian Americans. In fact, that was actually a relatively small part of his support. He had this incredible following among young people and libertarians and conservatives, you know, and he's announcing his run for mayor in New York right now. So it'll be interesting to see, can he pull it off there? But I think, you know, I looked at somebody like him as not only having, Andrew, more than anything, has the personality to run for office, probably more so than I do.
Well, it does. I mean, I think in public occupations all the way around. So I think in both senses, right? You have to have those figures, those mentors, those role models, those people that you can look at and say, hey, that person looks kind of like me. And not only, I would say, in the news and political sphere, but also in entertainment. This has become, you know, really evident. Seeing those fresh off the boat story or Kim's Convenience becomes important to another generation to be able to see themselves as actors, to be able to see themselves as stars, to have Henry Golding, you know, be the hot guy for an audience. That stuff is important. Also, sort of this sense of, do you have it in you to put yourself out there, to take the arrows and to do that? And that, you know, is hard and scary.
All right, I have to tee you up since you actually have a great Connie Chung story. Speaking of, tell the audience your Connie Chung story.
Okay, so on the role model front, really, honestly and truly, you know, Connie was one of the very, very few, May, older sister to me, right? She was just a little bit ahead of me in that. But she was, of course, influential, and a handful of others. I think of Linda Yu in Chicago when I was growing up. I think of Emerald Gay, Trisha Toyota. There are a handful of Asian American women on television and presenting that image. I think that made it easier for my parents to accept, to understand that, okay, maybe she can make it like that. But also, you know, just that reach back, reach out. So I had known Connie's family, some of her sisters, for a while, and before I actually finally met Connie Chung. And when I met her, you know, I told her, oh yeah, you know, look up to you and all these things. And also, I work with a producer who told me, you got to you got to wear false eyelashes because Connie Chung does. And you see what it's done for her career. And she laughed. She was great about it. I mean, she's never been shy about just speaking her truth, but she was really funny about it. We laughed and went on our merry way. And like a day later, I get a FedEx package, and in it, these are my prized possessions, Chris. In it are eyelashes from Connie Chung. And she gave me like whole directions. I mean, you should cut them like this. You should, but these are the very ones that she gave me and she sent to me right after we had that conversation. So I hope I don't get in trouble with her for saying it now, but it was hilarious. I mean, it was just that sense of, I'm here for you. You know, I'm here to back you up. I'm here to support you. Meant a lot to me. And I've taken that much more literally in my career. You know, I spent a lot of time in education. Julian, you see, Julian, I am protecting this legacy that I received directly from Connie. But I, you know, just knowing that, I think a lot about particularly younger folks coming up in my industry today, younger folks coming up in your industry. And I know you do a lot of that reach back to, you know, I've been in education for a while now, and I think that this is really important to be able to embrace and bring those folks forward, because otherwise it's really easy to get lost. It's really easy not to. And I know you must know this because my Asian parents felt most badly for me. They were both scientists, and they felt most badly and apologized to me many times for not being able to make contacts for me. And in your profession too, I mean, that wasn't, I think Mama Lou is on the line here.
He absolutely is on the line. So we can't let Joey, don't embarrass my mother.
No.
Actually, more importantly, don't embarrass me in front of my mother.
We need to bring Mama in. But you know, that might be hard for many immigrant parents to understand. Like, how is my child going to make it in this world?
No, I mean, look, I had incredibly loving and supportive parents, but you know, they were both in more science and technical fields. And when I decided, you know what, I want to be a lawyer and go to law school, they were supportive, but I had no role model. There was, you know, I'm sure there were a couple of, you know, random immigration lawyers that were Asian American in our community, but you didn't sort of see people working in big law firms or certainly, you know, going into politics. And so it's hard because, you know, you and I both know that so much of life is connections and networking. And when you come out of, you know, a world in which you don't have the benefits of that, you make your own way. It forces you to work harder to develop those contacts. And it's one of the reasons why now I continue to mentor that next generation behind me, because I think it's important for them to learn from, you know, the lessons and the mistakes that I have made along the way. I mean, you know, after law school, I went to go work at a law firm. You know, a big law firm in DC, made a lot of money, had my own secretary, had a really nice office. And then I decided, you know what, if I'm going to work, you know, 12, 14 hours a day, it's going to be for something other than helping one large corporation sue another large corporation for money. And I took my first job on Capitol Hill. I took a 40% pay cut. I went from having my own office to sharing an office with 3 other people. I was making my own photocopies. And it's sort of funny, as I've moved up increasingly in government, my offices have gotten smaller and smaller along the way. And, you know, I know, look, I mean, again, incredibly supportive parents, but, you know, for immigrant parents, this concept of, you know, well, not only was I not maximizing my earnings, but I was actually like taking pay cuts along the way. I mean, but again, that's the luxury we have of, you know, being, again, I always get confused whether we're first generation or second generation, but being the children of immigrants, their sacrifices and hard work gave us those luxuries that we didn't have to simply take jobs because of money. We could do them because we loved them. And, you know, you and I have had this conversation about, you know, we've had a lot of job changes along the way. Sometimes there were ones that we affirmatively sought, and sometimes they were not our chosen job changes, and they were forced upon us. But
right, but see, this is the thing. I think so I worked at CNN for 10 years, and I did relatively well as an anchor at CNN. I like to say I had Anderson Cooper shot his hour before he did. And by the way, he doesn't have any bigger audience than I did when I had that hour. But I look at that, and then one day I got laid off at CNN, which, in television, in journalism overall, but in television particularly if you're an on-air person, you need to anticipate that this happens. It's new management, things change. Likewise, in politics, this happens.
Yeah.
Your guy gets voted out, your guy reaches his term limit, you got to go look for another job. And my mother was horrified. My mother was absolutely horrified. It never dawned on her that I wouldn't stay at CNN until I was, into retirement. But when I called her, she said, "What did you do wrong?" And I think she just never really understood that this was just the nature of the industry, that you come and you go. And, I think particularly for immigrant parents from Asia who are accustomed to, lifetime commitment and loyalty to an organization, this has got to be a hard thing to understand.
I mean, what I always try to tell young people is, look, most of us, if you're going to follow a traditional career path, it will be a linear path. You will know that, 10 years into your job, you'll be a manager, 15 years, you'll be a vice president, 20, you'll be a senior vice president. And that's great, but that's not the job progression I've had. It's been anything from linear. In fact, in many ways, it's zigzagged along. And there have been plenty of times in my life where I wasn't quite sure what the next 3 months would bring. But you know what, for me, I've always just I've sought interesting opportunities, and more importantly, had the chance to work with good people. And what I've actually appreciated during my life is that I've had gap years along the way. Sometimes by choice and sometimes not by choice. But
this called gap 4 years? Or
yeah, the last 4 years have been a gap 4 years. But I worked for Barack Obama when he came to the U.S. Senate. He and I are law school classmates. Followed him into the White House, and so after 8 years of working for him, he had just gotten reelected. I decided I was burnt out. I was tired. And the idea of anyone kind of walking away from a senior White House job with an office in the West Wing and saying, "I'm just done," is unheard of. Right. But you know what? I needed to do that. And I told the president I wasn't done serving. But at some point, let me know, if there's something else he wanted me to do. But I was going to take some time off. And I'm so glad I did that. I mean, during that period of time, I co-wrote a book. I had 2 different university affiliations, and I taught and I did consulting and I gave speeches, and it was wonderful. And it really was a chance to get refreshed and re-energized so that when the next opportunity in government came along, I was ready for it. And again, when, January 20th, 2017 came along and I was out of a job because of change in administrations, I decided, I'm going to follow kind of an interesting career path. I enjoy talking. Let me see if I can make a run of this thing of talking on TV and see, I still can't make a living doing it anywhere, but it's fun. And I love having a voice. And so I always tell people, I can't tell you I have no 5-year plan. I don't even have like a 1-year plan or a 1-month plan. And again, not a linear career. But it's made for a lot of really interesting experiences.
Yeah. Can you tell us about what Mama Lou thought of your White House office?
Yeah. All right. So I will tell you this. Okay. So 2 stories. The day, inauguration day, January 20th, 2009. Obviously I was there when Barack Obama got sworn in the first time. And then I didn't stay around for any parade or anything because we had to get to work. So I'm in my office in the West Wing, day 1, like literally like hour 2. I call my mom up on the phone and I said, "Mom, I'm calling from my office." And she goes, "Aren't you at the parade?" And I said, "No, Mom, I'm at my office in the White House." And I think at that point it suddenly dawned on her that, like, gosh, my son works at the White House. And that's an amazing
Yeah.
story if you think about just one generation, from coming to this country with very little to study, and then your son goes and works in the White House. Although I will say the first time my mom came to visit me in the White House, she did comment on how small my office was and how I did not have a window. I literally, to be fair, I didn't have the smallest office in the West Wing. I had one of the 5 smallest offices. But as I always tell people, I could be in the Oval Office in 30 seconds, walking at a reasonable pace. And even if you have a small office in the West Wing, it's like having the worst house in the nicest neighborhood. You're still living in a nice neighborhood.
Yeah, and I also got to tell you, the television news anchors typically do not have big offices, because you get this big desk that you sit at for several hours at a time. That's a little bit different. Comes with a camera, doesn't come with much of an office.
So tell me, we were talking about what was it like when your parents saw you on TV? Like, what would they react to? Did they like it when their friends would say, "Oh, I just saw Joey on, CNN or CBC"? Yes.
After my parents passed away, and you go through their things, you realize all the time that I was working, they were in fact collecting. My mother was in fact collecting things from the newspaper, old clips, bad photos, which, by the way, I also have to say that the promo for this event has a really terrible photo of me from back when I was pregnant. I just look enormous in it. But anyway, but all that time, I think, and she'd been collecting, she'd record my shows on CNN on these VHS tapes, and then she accumulated them. I don't know what to do with them now, but she apparently had been recording them for years. So I recognized that they were proud, but they certainly, if they were impressed, they didn't show it. They were never very, they very rarely came to see like my studio or anything like that. They were never big on that. My parents were also very much, don't stick your head out. Don't be the nail coming out of the board.
Yeah.
Be part of the scene. Don't try to stick out like that. And so I think that was very difficult for them. I think it was difficult for them to absorb that in this culture, that standout, that individuality is actually valued, where for them, there was a certain element of it that was, you shouldn't try to be so visible like that. So I think they were proud that I had done well, but I don't think they were ever tremendously impressed. And I also, both my parents were like multi-degreed scientists. My father had patents. He had done all these interesting things in biochemistry. He's an emeritus professor. And my mother had 4 degrees. And so my puny 2 little degrees, they were always like, you can't do better than that. My father was, to his dying day, said, maybe you should go to law school. I'm like, it's a little bit late now. But I think that they also were the people who said, a lot of Asian American kids have said, well, did your parents want you to be in science? And they came to me fairly early on and said, maybe you're not so smart. Maybe you should think about some other career. So I think that for them, television was probably the limit of what they thought I could do.
That is so funny. We have one question that's been raised. I want to encourage others who are watching to submit a question, contribute to the chat. I know we have some chat as well. This is an interesting question that Ben Chang submitted. 1% you are a curiosity, 10% you are a threat. Do you think Chinese Americans heading that way in California? I think it is already here. I mean, we live, I'd love your thoughts on this. I mean, we live in this interesting moment when there's more diversity in this country than we have ever had. Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial group in the United States, and the numbers are off the charts in the South, in particular, places like Texas. And
Georgia,
yet, look,
a long time home.
Georgia, and yet we are now, 10 months into a pandemic where we've heard, it referred to as the China virus or Kung flu. And, you see these heartbreaking stories about frontline workers, doctors and nurses who are Asian Americans being attacked by their, patients for giving them the coronavirus. I do fear that we are in this moment as anti-China sentiment grows. I think that will make it challenging for people like you and me, who look like you and me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already seen that. I think we've already seen the evidence of the impact this year of some of the almost former president's comments that have, I think you can draw a pretty clean line. A number of my friends who are still working reporters and are Asian American have had direct conflicts with people on the street. People have approached them and been, made vicious comments. Obviously we've seen some of the violence against Asians and Asian Americans that has happened. And so I think Ben has a fair point, and, Stan Liu is also asking in the chat about my experience in South Carolina, to Ben's point about the volume. So I lived in South Carolina in the 1980s. There were, as I recollect, just about 300 Asian American voters in, not all the state, but the big chunk of the state in the Low Country around Charleston. There were about 300 Asian American voters. Pretty much everywhere I went, there's a very big naval base there at the time. Pretty much everywhere I went, I was assumed to be the wife of a service person, that, war bride kind of thing. I think there was a lot of that. I think all the years I lived in the South, and I lived in the South for like almost 20 years, I can't tell you how many times people said to me, "You talk real good." And was it deliberately hurtful? No, because I think people were very, they were very maybe aware of the presence of a alien person, but not aggressive in the way that we have seen in the last year.
Yeah.
And, maybe people talk bad about you behind your back, and it goes back to what I said earlier about being naive, but directly, I mean, in your experience, have you seen that, like, in a political environment? Have you seen the, "Hey, Chinese guy, you're a threatening figure"?
Oh boy, gosh, the things that are said to me on Twitter are just off the charts horrible. And again, for those of you that don't, there's a point in which you're best off not looking into your the notifications on Twitter, or when a clip posts somewhere and looking into the comments section. Boy, the number of times I've been called a Chinese spy is incredible. It's kind of the go-to place. It's the go-to place where people go when it's an easy pot shot to take at people. No, I mean, look, I am I'm fully aware that the first impression people form of me is the way I look. I suspect once I open my mouth and they find out that I speak pretty good English, that they realize I'm born here. And I think the more they hear from me, they a lot of those initial impressions dissipate. But it is, I mean, you never get away from your race. And I remember my dad early on, talking about assimilation to me. He said, "Look, no matter how much education you get or how much money you have, you're always going to look this way." And I'm mindful of that. Now, I've been lucky. I mean, I've for 11 out of 12 years, I worked for Barack Obama, who, wanted his staff to reflect the diversity of the country. And so I had somebody who saw my race as an asset. Now, that being said, there were plenty of times, look, whenever there were, Asian American leaders coming to the White House, I would be in the meeting, even though that really wasn't my portfolio necessarily, but I was fine with that. And there were plenty of times when, it certainly works to your advantage. I mean, it got me an invitation to the state dinner when when the president of China comes to the U.S., or there were several times when I went to China on U.S. delegations because of who I am. So it's sort of hard to say whether it's helped or hurt, because it just is what it is, and I'm sure it has both helped and hurt along the way.
I have to say that my cousin Vivian is in the chat saying that no, my parents actually were proud of what I did. Thank you, Viv. I think that, you know, one of the things that always makes me wonder is whether we should be, I don't want to be pigeonholed, right? I don't want to be a voice only. And this was actually a thing for Connie Chung when she started out, because she, you know, people asked her questions about being an Asian American in journalism. And she said, well, I'm a journalist first. And I get that. But to your point also, this is my face. This is the one I came with. This is the one I'm going out with. This is it.
Yeah.
This is who I'm always going to be. And, you know, I wonder how you feel about, like, should you only be interviewed for, hey, Chris, what about our China trade policy?
Right.
What about, you know, the presence of Asian Americans in the cabinet? Should we always be, as journalists, coming to you saying, oh yeah, he's the Chinese guy, let's ask him the question?
Yeah. You know, it's shocking. Whenever I do TV commentary, I always say to producers, I can do almost any subject, but I actually know shockingly little about foreign relations. So please don't ask me about China. I mean, I could give you 30 seconds on it, but I can't tell you much more than that. I don't know if that was a conscious decision to kind of move away from the easy place it is to be pigeonholed. I will say this. I mean, you know, for the early part of my career, and certainly growing up, I tried very hard not to, you know, I mean, I certainly understood that I was a Chinese American, but it wasn't something I sort of held out. I think as I've gotten more advanced in my career, and I've started to realize that, again, you know, that people look up to me, and I, you know, I can help open doors for other people. I've been much more forceful and much more proactive in pushing that aspect. And it's in part because, you know, I know that these doors were opened to me by other people along the way. I mean, you know, one of the great things about serving in government is having a chance to work with role models. And one of my great role models has been Gary Locke. Gary was the first Asian American governor in the continental United States, first Chinese American governor, period. And Gary worked as the Commerce Secretary in the Obama administration and the ambassador to China. And he's actually become a very close personal friend. And, you know, I think about Gary getting elected, you know, governor of Washington State, you know, in 1998, 1996, something like that, how unusual that was at the time. And I realized that, you know, I owe him a great, a debt of gratitude because of the doors he's opened. So I try to do that for other people. So I've become much more comfortable later in my life about that.
Yeah, I think that goes to Vivian Ang's point in the Q&A about, you know, what can we do as Chinese Americans and more broadly as Asian Americans, how can we be more united in this way? And I think, and also, you know, I think right here, Cheryl's asking about awareness of issues like the Chinese Exclusion Act and teaching history. The blanket answer I would have about this is the importance of telling our stories. So the visibility of the Chinese American Museum is really important to me, right? You know, I know you're on this board, and Julian Ha, my friend, is also out here, and I see what y'all are doing in this museum as being vitally important, because this is part of telling the story, right? Yeah. Telling people things that they didn't know. I'll tell you, from a media perspective, I don't really get why there isn't an Asian American channel in the way that there has been BET or
Telemundo or Univision.
Yeah, I mean, why we don't have that? We don't have that mostly because of funding. it's probably going to take someone, and there are wealthy people out there, but somebody in the community being willing to fund that kind of work. The LA Times now, but that's a general publication, but owned by a Chinese American. I think that is the value of the free and open media, is that you can use it to tell the stories of your community. And that I do think is important. I do think also the good and bad stories of Asian America. I don't think it should only be the, hey, aren't we wonderful? And all of our kids are smarter than yours. And, I don't think it should be that. I think it should be a serious look at the stories, the challenges, the opportunities facing Asians in America. Because I think that does it happen overnight? No, but I think that's where you start to break through to people to help them understand that you're not an alien voice. You are part of the fabric of this country and the community.
Joey, did you see the PBS series a couple months ago on Asian American?
Yeah.
It is. So I watched that, and again, for anyone watching this who has not seen it, please, I think you can catch it online. I saw it with my wife, who is Caucasian, and we finished watching this multi-part series, and she was like, "Wow, that was kind of depressing." And I said, "Actually, the history of Asians in America is a pretty depressing history. I mean, you go from, the Chinese railroad workers to the Chinese Exclusion Act to Japanese American internment to, anti-Korean sentiment during the Korean War, anti-Vietnamese sentiment, anti-Japanese sentiment, and we're now coming full circle again to anti-Chinese sentiment. I mean, this has not been a great history, notwithstanding the achievements that our race has made in this country. And I think it shows again, we have accomplished remarkable things in this country, and yet we still face so many barriers along the way. And, when people ask me what more we can do, I do think it's important to increasingly both embrace kind of a pan-Asian perspective, not just Chinese American, but Asian American. And when we say Asian American, we don't just mean East Asians, we mean South Asians as well.
Islanders. Yeah,
Pacific Islanders. I mean, and I think as much of anything, it is, forming alliances with the African American community and with the Hispanic community. I mean, I always tell people Asian Americans march with Dr. King, Asian Americans
Boggs
march with Cesar Chavez, and the gains of the other communities have inured to our benefit. And we should think of them as allies. But unfortunately, a lot of this is a generational thing as well.
Yeah. No, I think, but again, I think this is where the storytelling becomes really important. I think, reminding people of these things. The presentation in the PBS series was great. No doubt about it. That's one series, one network, not the most watched network, but, one network. We have to make that part of the regular conversation. We have to be a part of the conversation. I would say to those of you, and I've had this experience, so I'm going to put it out there. Sometimes I have approached Asian Americans to comment on things, and they have been reluctant to be on TV. I'll tell you what I think, but I'm not going to do it on TV. Well, I need people to be on TV because that's what I do. And, it's important, people feel like, oh, well, people, they don't want to see me. They don't want me. I have an accent. I'm not comfortable doing that. You know what, y'all, it is important that if they're out interviewing, asking people about, grocery prices or whatever, it's important for our faces to be seen. And maybe that is going to be uncomfortable sometimes. Maybe it is going to be uncomfortable to be the lone political figure who looks like Chris does in a room of important and powerful people. Maybe it is going to be uncomfortable to be, the lone anchor of an evening newscast that looks like me. Maybe there are going to be uncomfortable moments, but I think that as a community, it's really vital that we put ourselves up for those moments.
Yeah.
And then go home and lick any wounds that you afterwards.
So we've got a couple minutes left. We had an interesting comment in the chat from Yongling who said, as a first-generation Asian immigrant, I agree that it's difficult to show that I'm impressed. It goes against my upbringing because all the time that I lived in China, I was told to be reserved and not brag.
Yeah.
I will tell you, reserving and not bragging doesn't work well in politics. How does that work in journalism?
Well, think about it. I mean, think who's on TV. Think who are the, whose names do you remember? You tend to remember the ones who make a splash in some way, right? Who put their visibility out there, also who take the arrows in the back. I think any of these public occupations, this is a recurring theme. You got to build up your skin and be a little thick-skinned about taking the crap, or be like I was for so much of my career, just like, really, they don't think I'm nice? How could that be? I think maybe you just have to toughen or not see it. Turn off your DMs in your Twitter feed so you don't get the nasties, and not look at those messages. What do you think?
No, I think it's the same way. I mean, I think it goes, like it or not, at a certain point in your life, you are a public figure. And that comes with, some nice things. People come up to you and recognize you and say nice things. And plenty of times people say not nice things to you. And it just is what it is. But look, I'm not an immigrant to this country. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm entitled to my views. I have nothing to fear from speaking my voice. And I think, in my using my voice, hopefully I empower others to use their voice as well. And I will tell you that it is, I say this now, I feel like I'm an older person now. When I see the younger generation of people who are out there trying to make a difference in the world, they're not shy and retiring. They're not keeping to themselves. They're speaking out. And I think that's wonderful, because we need more of that in our community.
Yeah, no, we do. I think we do need to understand the value of that for all of the community, just to be able to see that. There was a question that goes back to sort of the transition that you've been involved with, and the reasons why this anonymous person is asking. The rumors were Andrew Yang might be tapped for that. That didn't happen. Do you know why? Part of it is that wants to be mayor of New York, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, Andrew has become a friend, and again, I have the greatest respect for Andrew, and I think he would have been a fantastic member of the cabinet. Look, it's hard to be a member of the cabinet. I mean, you are a powerful figure, but yet you take your instructions from people in the White House, and you don't get ahead of the president on issues. Analogy somebody once gave me who was in the cabinet: when you're in the cabinet, you're like the Pips from Gladys Knight and the Pips. No one is paying to see the Pips. They're paying to see Gladys Knight, and your job is just to dance along in rhythm behind Gladys Knight. And some people want to be a Pip, and some people don't want to be a Pip. And again, I mean that in no disrespect. I mean, these are very, very powerful jobs, but there comes a point where President of the United States X and everyone else falls into line. That being said, there are so many people like Andrew Yang who would have been fantastic in government. He will make a great mayor if he gets elected. And, both of the people that have been nominated, Neera Tanden and Catherine Tai, are both friends of mine. They're great public servants, and they will do good work in this administration, as I'm sure many others will do too.
Yeah. My friend Denise Lies is in the chat asking about Asian Americans needing training on how to self-advocate.
Yeah.
In the professional world, not knowing how to tactfully brag or claim credit can be very detrimental. And I think she's really right about this. I know this is true in media. I suspect this is also true in politics. In the back room of things, who's got the power? It's the person who has the ability and sort of the gumption to be able to say, I can handle that. I've got that under control. I've done that. And it's sometimes I hear my parents, who both long passed away, but I hear them in my head going, oh, you can't do that. Like, well, I just said it. It's a little bit late now. So I think you do have to have a little of that gumption. It works for populations that do not look like us.
Yeah. It is. No, I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, look, I was raised that if you work hard, you will succeed. And I think basically that is true. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. There are a lot of people in this world who work hard. So how, among all of these hardworking people, why would somebody pick you? And I do think, you have to raise your hand. You have to appropriately take credit when credit is due. Being the person in the background is never as good as being the person in the foreground. And so if you don't speak up and if you don't accept recognition, people overlook you.
Yeah. I just want to respond to a question that Cheryl had in the chat about how do we get stories in front of the media. I mean,
Yeah.
part of it is, I think, again, making those stories known to reporters you think will be accessible to you. And also, on the flip side, being ready to step up and deal with that. So I had wanted to do an event. I wanted to cover the anniversary of the railroad.
Yeah.
And I know, the media bombs in, does these things. I know that I was making like all kinds of last minute requests, but I can't tell you how difficult it was to get somebody on camera to do that. And I said, well, for God's sake, this is your shot, folks. I need you. At the same time, I want to give a shout out to a couple journalists who I think have, besides Richard Louis, who is currently in television, done so many great things for bringing stories and people forward. But I want to talk just for a moment about Helen Zia, who has been for, I don't know if she'd want me to say decades, but for decades, just on the front lines of bringing stories forward, uncomfortable stories forward from Vincent Chin on. She's brought the uncomfortable stories forward into the conversation. She's kept the light on those things, and that's what journalists are supposed to be doing. And I think she's been extraordinary in that. And also, I want to just have a small shout out to Corky Lee, who's a photographer based in New York, who has really recorded the Chinese American experience so much in this country. He currently has a health situation, so if you look on Facebook within the community, I'm sure you will see some of the fundraising efforts for him, but he has really been a champion for getting those images in the community. And there are people like that. There are people who are willing to tell the stories and jump in there. And I think we need storytellers to do it, but we also need people coming forward with the stories and saying, this is your opportunity to speak.
Yeah, I'll also add a shout out to Helen Zia. Her new book, probably about a year or two old, is just, it's fantastic. It's about her mother's departure from China. It really is a incredibly compelling read, and she's a beautiful, beautiful writer.
She is.
I see David back.
Uh-oh.
It breaks my heart to say that we are out of time. But yeah, thank you to both of you for taking the time to speak with us, and thank you for being trailblazers. Not just for the Asian American community, but for all Americans. I think you guys have done amazing things, and you're an inspiration to all of us. So, Joey, while I was off camera, I was creating an artifact catalog number for the false eyelashes.
I don't know if I'm going to give these up quite yet, but
well, in the museum world, we might have some, a fake eyelash. Say this is a replica of.
Right. No,
but
that seems like a good plan.
Yeah. So just for everyone's knowledge, this event has been recorded. So if you want to watch it again, or if you want to share this with someone else, this should be available on our website and our YouTube channel in the upcoming days. And if you're interested in learning more about the new Chinese American Museum, or if you'd like to support great content like this, just visit us on the web at, let me just put this up here, www.chineseamericanmuseum.org. And Joey, do you want to plug the Pointer Institute, or you want to tell us how to reach you there?
I would plug the Pointer Institute as a great institution for journalism education. Our motto is to make good journalists better. In these times, we need that more than ever. We have learned, I think, in the recent months, the value of facts, of reporting facts, of discerning what are facts. And I'm very proud to be involved with that organization, as well as I am proud of the wonderful work that the Chinese American Museum of DC is doing, because I think that I only had one chance to visit before, in the before times, but I was so impressed with what you guys have done so far. And I know when we return to normal, this is going to be a real standout spot for everyone to come to. So I encourage all of you who have joined us here to look forward to that. And thank you also for those of you who've been part of this event today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Anything else? David, let me just plug as well.
Yeah, sure.
I have a bunch of stuff that I want to donate to the museum. And so if Joey donates her eyelashes, I will find something great from the Obama White House to donate as well.
Yeah, we would love that.
And while I have enjoyed the programming and being associated with the museum, I look forward to actually visiting in person when things get back to normal. So thank you for letting both of us be part of this event today.
Oh, it's our honor. We look forward to that day.
All right.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Everybody have a terrific day.